Explain how people who have devoted their entire life, like John Kelly, to the protection of this country and the alliances that have sustained us since World War II, how much of a shock this is for Donald Trump to be spending his time with NATO allies trashing them.
So, Joe, just imagine General Kelly. He has served as the military aide to, in succession, Secretary Bob Gates, a Republican, and then Secretary Leon Panetta. He has gone with them to many, many NATO meetings just like this. And he's watched the way in which U.S. officials take care of this most important defense alliance that our country has. And he arrives, breakfast or no breakfast, with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump just takes out the two six-shooters and starts banging away. Yeah. And uses language that's as inflammatory as any I've heard in this kind of setting, calling Germany a captive, a captive of Russia. Using the most sharp and strident language. The issues he was talking about are ones that you can certainly debate. Germany's reliance on Russian gas is more than it should be, and people have been saying that for a decade. But to do it in that way, and it's just obvious, he got off that plane ready to pick a fight. Why did he do that? Why does he think that on his way to a summit meeting with Vladimir Putin, trashing the NATO alliance is his best bet? The only thing I could think of this morning, you know how much Donald Trump likes boxing. You know how they have weigh-ins before boxing matches? When the boxers get together and they kind of get eye to eye and start trash talking, saying nasty things about each other, and then they go off to the fight. Well, he's done this twice in a row now with our European allies before going off to a fight with somebody else. So maybe this is the weigh-in moment, but it sure was strange to watch.
But how distressing, though, Mika, that he attacked Canada. He attacked, again, Democratic allies before going off and cuddling up with Kim Jong-un, who is openly mocking him and his administration now. And now he's doing this before he goes to see Vladimir Putin. Well, there is a bit of a pattern here.
Oh, definitely. And there's you can't see this in any other lens, but that this is for Putin in many ways. President Trump reportedly arrived about a half an hour late this morning's North Atlantic Council meeting with Georgia and Ukraine. Much like his late arrival for the Gender Equality Advisory Council breakfast during the G7 summit last month in Canada. Joe tweeted this morning, showing up late this morning, quote, how interesting that Trump would go out of his way to insult the two countries Putin invaded over the past decade. So now the U.S. president performs shameless acts of trolling on Russia's behalf.
And it is extraordinary that Donald Trump has a meeting with the two countries that Vladimir Putin invaded over the past 10 years. And he showed them remarkable disrespect. Again, doing the very thing that Vladimir Putin would absolutely love him to do.
Yeah, and I think David is right. I think the signals and the method by which the president communicates, even the symbolism of arriving late to this meeting, is just terrible. And it comes not just in the wake of tension with NATO, raising the issues around defense spending, German dependence on Russian oil and gas, but at a time of rising trade tension with Europe, at a time when there doesn't seem to be a constructive agenda with our transatlantic partners, our classic allies. And I can tell you, I've talked to European diplomats. They are distressed because they don't feel like there's anything positive coming out of the administration. And their great fear here of this next, sort of period here, this next week, is not only the tough signals and the ungracious manners of the president in these settings, but what comes in the Helsinki summit. Will the president actually give things up that matter to the transatlantic relationship? Will he begin to shift policy on the Ukraine or Crimea? Will he begin to give up on issues that are important to the alliance in Syria, where Russia has interest? And I think, more important than the symbolism of him arriving late is whether or not he is shifting U.S. policy fundamentally in the transatlantic context, and whether or not the meeting in Helsinki begins to signal that shift.
It's about lunchtime in Brussels, day 2 of the meeting, and the president already is tweeting, continuing his criticism of NATO allies over defense spending. Earlier this morning, President Trump tweeted, quote, "Presidents have been trying unsuccessfully for years to get Germany and other rich NATO nations to pay more toward their protection from Russia. They pay only a fraction of their costs. The U.S. pays tens of billions of dollars too much to subsidize Europe and loses big on trade." He had a follow-up tweet to that, writing, Germany wants, quote, protection from Russia. During yesterday's closed-door working session, attendees say President Trump repeated those same lines, that NATO member states need to pay more for defense and that Germany was too dependent on Russia for energy. Although during that meeting and on Twitter, President Trump upped the ante. The White House has confirmed that during the working session, President Trump told allies they must increase the amount of GDP spending toward defense to 4%, which Trump also tweeted this morning. That doubles the 2% target, which is set for 2024. And the president now is demanding that allies meet the 2% goal immediately. But the U.S. does not meet Trump's 4% figure either. Currently, the United States contributes 3.3% of GDP toward defense. That's per the Pentagon. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, tweeted about NATO yesterday, quote, NATO is the most successful alliance in history. All NATO allies have committed to extending this success through increased defense spending, deterrence and defense, and fighting terrorism. Weakness provokes, strength and cohesion protects. This remains our bedrock belief.
So you have a secretary, of course, backing NATO.
And he was in that room while President Trump was barking across the table at the Secretary General of NATO and had to follow up and come sweep behind him with that tweet, reaffirming the United States' commitment to NATO.
We just have word that we're awaiting now a news conference from President Trump that he will be speaking to the cameras. So we shall see how that goes.
Well, maybe he'll talk. Maybe he'll talk really about all the cameras that were in Singapore. Do you have that tweet from last night?
Well, the Washington Post reported from someone inside a NATO dinner last night where the president was, that the president was bragging about the Kim Jong-un summit and said he called golfer Jack Nicklaus afterward to say, they have 1,000 cameras at the Oscars. We had 6,000 cameras in Singapore. The buzz was fantastic. That's someone inside the dinner quoting the president.
And that's all you need to know. The buzz was fantastic, which is, again, we said he was doing it for cheap headlines. I guess he was doing it for cheap headlines and also for buzz, because now he's got Kim Jong-un deciding to pick potatoes in his summer whites instead of meeting with the United States Secretary of State. And the trade war. This trade war that started with like 18 products has now just exploded, Steve Ratner, and the market's starting to get very concerned.
Well, and he's fighting a trade war on multiple fronts. You've got a trade war going on with China, and admittedly, there are trade issues with China. This, of course, is not the way to go about it. But apropos of this summit, he's also got a trade war going on with Europe. Remember that they're threatening auto tariffs. They're threatening tariffs on Jack Daniel's whiskey going to Europe. We're threatening tariffs.
Wait a second, Meacham. Are you okay?
I'm sorry, Meacham.
Can we get oxygen for Meacham?
I'm not sure I'm not sure if they're aiming at John Meacham or Mitch McConnell, but it's one of the two of you anyway. And so, yeah, so you know, how do you conduct diplomacy with allies when you're simultaneously conducting a trade war against them? Well,
you could say the same thing, couldn't you, David Ignatius, about the United States conducting a trade war with China at the same time? We need China to help North Korea move towards denuclearization, but that's certainly not happening.
President Trump needs to prioritize. There is nothing more important for White Houses than to decide what is the thing that we want to achieve. And that's why we have a National Security Council, to organize policy so it all goes in the direction of success of the primary objective. And that's one thing this group in a year and a half doesn't seem to have learned at all.
And they also don't understand, and we can say this, I mean, certainly people like Mike Pompeo and General Mattis understand it better than most anybody in Washington. But Donald Trump and several others, John, don't understand that it's a very complex, complicated, interconnected world out there. I mean, I remember talking when France was acting abhorrently in the lead up to the Iraq War and going, whispering behind our backs and trying to undermine us and stab us in the back. I remember saying something to somebody in the intelligence services, and they said, no, listen, Leviathan and Chirac are acting terribly, but behind the scenes, their intel people are the best there are. They're fantastic. After 9/11, it was the Iranians, and David Ignatius can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the Iranians who actually helped us get a better grasp of what was going on in Afghanistan. So it's a very complicated world out there, and if Donald Trump declares war on all fronts, then we're going to be ineffective on all fronts.
Yeah, there are two possibilities here. One is it's a lot less complicated than we think, and that he's just now taking to a global stage the ways and means in which he rose to power here. NATO is, this is the politics of grievance, it's the politics of resentment.
So NATO is now playing the role of Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah, he's attacking, he's saying they're ripping us off.
Really good analysis.
I'm actually deadly serious.
Yeah.
No, he needs a villain.
Yep.
We mentioned boxing, David mentioned boxing, but really his real sport, remember, is professional wrestling. And that's the most important thing to remember, because you invent an adversary, you pretend to fight, but still somebody gets hurt.
Right.
And so
actually, a lot of people in this case get hurt.
One. The other possibility is this is part of an unusually elaborate, potentially unprecedented story of undue pressure being put on the president for various reasons. And one interpretation here is he's talking about Russia and people being dependent on Russia and in business with Russia in order to create a dust storm so that if it comes back that he is,
right.
So is Germany. Everybody does.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think he was certainly using the whole gas thing to make it seem like he was antagonistic to Putin. But the other thing to remember about Trump, apropos your wrestling or the boxing analogy, is he likes being one-on-one. He hates these multilateral institutions. He hates getting in a room with a bunch of people who might gang up on him, And so he acts out and he behaves badly every time he's surrounded by a whole group of world leaders.
He's a golfer, not a team player.
Yeah, he's a golfer, not a team player.
And if you look at what he's been doing, Willie, the overall, it seems strategy seems to be doing what Vladimir Putin would want him to do. He's undermining NATO. He's saying that Vladimir Putin is the least of his troubles, that he'll be able to get along with him better than anybody else. And I don't know if you saw this reaction from Russian state TV after Donald Trump again attacked Germany, a powerful NATO ally, and NATO itself. And obviously also our most critical military alliance. This is Russian TV.
Я никогда не наблюдала и не думала, что я буду наблюдать вот такой период, когда не кто-нибудь, ни Советский Союз и не Россия потом, которая пыталась много раз, особенно Советский Союз, бить клин между трансатлантическими союзниками, а главный из них, да, Вашингтон, президент Соединенных Штатов, делает все, чтобы разбить основы вот этого трансатлантической солидарности и союзничества.
And Willie, you're actually seeing this more and more on Russian TV, where they're saying, let's just get out of the way. Donald Trump is destroying the alliance that we have been trying to undermine for decades.
I don't think Putin ever could have imagined it would be this easy, that Donald Trump is doing it for him and doing it just out in the open. You know, he's saying it in press conferences and news availabilities that he's trying to peel apart NATO in some respects. This puts his meeting on Monday in Helsinki with Putin into an incredibly intense spotlight. What will he say to Putin? Will he confront him about meddling? Will he talk to him about NATO? Will he get into the things that are actually important? Or will it be another Kim Jong-un photo op with glad handing and things that don't advance U.S. interests or raise U.S. concerns? We will see on Monday.
Yeah. Wonder, though, when President Trump's cabinet, when his foreign policy leaders are going to get around him or get behind what's right and get behind NATO, and perhaps abandon this president on this issue like Congress has.
Well, it's so fascinating. One, we've seen it time and again. Donald Trump will say something ahistorical on Russia, embarrassing, something that doesn't line up with the aberrant behavior of Vladimir Putin over the past decade. And you'll have Mike Pence go to the Balkans and deliver a fire-breather speech that Ronald Reagan could have delivered. You'll see Nikki Haley on the floor of the United Nations doing the same thing. You'll see Mike Pompeo. You'll see everybody that is surrounding Donald Trump actually saying exactly what we would all want them to say about Russia's aberrant behavior. And yet, the commander-in-chief continues to attack NATO, continues to praise Putin, and continues to play right into Vladimir Putin's hands. What are we to make of it?
Yeah, Joe, it's confounding for two reasons. One, the president obviously is stepping all over not only his administration officials, but also his own government's policies.
Right. I'm going to have to interrupt you, Juan. I'm so sorry, but here is the President of the United States.
I appreciate it. We've had a very amazing two-day period in Brussels, and we really accomplished a lot with respect to NATO. For years, presidents have been coming to these meetings and talked about the expense, the tremendous expense for the United States, and tremendous progress has been made. Everyone's agreed to substantially up their commitment. They're going to up it at levels that they've never thought of before. Prior to last year, where I attended my first meeting, it was going down. The amount of money being spent by countries was going down, and down very substantially. And now it's going up very substantially, and commitments were made. Only 5 of 29 countries were making their commitment, and that's now changed.
Actually, what the president just said there about all of the contributions going down is a lie. So they continue to go up under Barack Obama near the end of the Obama administration. Let's go ahead and let him continue to talk, but he was lying when he said that. Back to the president.
They raised an additional $33 billion. That's been put up by the various countries, not including the United States. And the United States commitment to NATO is very strong, remains very strong, but primarily because everyone, the spirit they have, the amount of money they're willing to spend, the additional money that they will be putting up has been really, really amazing to see it. To see the level of spirit in that room is incredible. And I hope that we're going to be able to get along with Russia. I think that we probably will be able to. The people in the room think so, but they really stepped up their commitment and stepped it up like they never have before. So we took in an additional 33. The number could actually be higher than 40 when they give you the final number. The Secretary General Stoltenberg will be giving those numbers sometime today, probably in his concluding press statement. But we are doing numbers like they've never done before or ever seen before. And you'll be seeing that, and I guess you'll be hearing that a little bit later. Okay, we have our Secretary of State, as you know, and we have John is here. So if you have any questions for the three of us, Mike Pompeo just got back from a third trip, as you know, to North Korea. He's become a true expert on the trips to North Korea, the best way to get there, the best way to get out. And he gets along very well, and he's doing a great job over there. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Yes.
President Terry McCauley with BBC. Can you tell us whether or not you warned people that the U.S. would pull out of NATO if they weren't meeting their spending goals?
I told people that I'd be very unhappy if they didn't up their commitments very substantially, because the United States has been paying a tremendous amount, probably 90% of the cost of NATO. And now people are going to start, and countries are going to start upping their commitments. So I let them know yesterday, actually. I was surprised that you didn't pick it up. It took till today. But yesterday, I let them know that I was extremely unhappy with what was happening, and they have substantially upped their commitment. Yeah, and now we're very happy and have a very, very powerful, very, very strong NATO, much stronger than it was 2 days ago.
Yes, the President of the United
Another falsity.
States just said that the United States paid about 90% of NATO's expenses.
That is not true.
Not true. It's actually closer to 66%. Back to the President.
Engaging with NATO, and do you think that your rhetoric helps NATO cohesion, or are you worried that people might think that the U.S. is going to not be as committed to NATO? There are a lot of people who say they were worried and stressed by what you did yesterday.
Well, they were probably worried because the United States was not being treated fairly, but now we are because the commitment has been up so much. So now they are. And I was very firm yesterday. You have to understand, I know a lot of the people in the room. I was here last year. I let them know last year in a less firm manner, but pretty firm, and they raised an additional $33 billion, I think going to $40 billion, but it's $33 billion as of today. And then today and yesterday, I was probably a little bit more firm. But I believe in NATO. I think NATO is a very important, probably the greatest ever done. But the United States was paying for anywhere from 70 to 90% of it, depending on the way you calculate. That's not fair to the United States. In addition to that, as you know, we're in negotiations with the EU, and we're going to be meeting with them next week. We've been treated very unfairly on trade. Our farmers have been shut out of the European Union. Now, you could say they're different, but basically, to a large extent, they're the same countries. So I think we're going to be ultimately treated fairly on trade. We'll see what happens. But I can tell you that NATO now is really a fine-tuned machine. People are paying money that they never paid before. They're happy to do it. And the United States is being treated much more fairly. Yes, sir.
PBS NewsHour. Did you win any concessions in your meeting and discussions with the German Chancellor when it comes to German defense spending and also this issue of purchasing energy from Russia? And secondly, what would you say to your critics that say by creating this scene here at NATO, you're only enabling President Putin in Russia to further disturb things in Ukraine and Georgia?
Well, if you consider putting up tremendously the additional funds at a level that nobody's ever seen before, I don't think that's helping Russia. I think that NATO is much stronger now than it was 2 days ago. I think that NATO was not doing what they were supposed to be doing, a lot of the countries, and we were doing much more than we should have been doing. Frankly, we were carrying too much of a burden. That's why we call it burden sharing. I was using the term a lot today. Burden sharing. We had a fantastic meeting at the end.
When it comes to burden sharing,
and they are putting up a lot.
When it comes to burden sharing, as far as the actual expenses of NATO, the United States pays 22% of carrying the cost of NATO. That's 22%, not 90%.
So we're going to have to figure that out.
If you want to talk about military spending, it's about 66%
now. And actually, I think the world is
we will
talking
be
about
showing
it now,
charts later to show that what the president's been saying, not only now, but over the past several days, it's just been a lie. In fact, Europe's been spending more of a percentage of an increase than the United States since 2011. And now, back to the
we
president.
discussed it at length today. Germany has agreed to do a lot better than they were doing, and we're very happy with that. We had a very good relationship with Angela Merkel. Yes.
Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Margaret Tala from Bloomberg.
Yes. After all these years, I know, Margaret. Go ahead.
Thank you. Maybe I'm being dense here, but could you just clarify, are you still threatening to potentially pull the United States out of NATO for any reason? And do you believe you can do that without Congress's explicit support and approval?
I think I probably can, but that's unnecessary. And the people have stepped up today like they've never stepped up before. And remember the word, $33 billion more they're paying. And you'll hear that from the Secretary General in a little while. He thanked me, actually. He actually thanked me. And everybody in the room thanked me. There's a great collegial spirit in that room that I don't think they've had in many years. They're very strong. So, yeah, very, very unified, very strong, no problem, right?
We're in NATO. No, okay.
No problem.
Mr. President, Jonathan Lemire with the Associated Press.
Sure.
You have said previously you wanted the countries to step up their spending to 2%. Yesterday, the suggestion it might be 4% or perhaps 2% at a much quicker timetable. Yeah. Can you clarify what did they commit to doing? Yeah. Is that satisfactory to you?
So what they're doing is spending at a much faster clip. They're going up to the 2% level. Now, you have to understand, some of them have parliaments. They have their own Congresses. They have a lot of things they have to go to. So, you know, they're here as a prime minister or as a president, and they can't necessarily go in and say, this is what we're going to do. But they're going back for approvals. Some are at 2%. Others have agreed definitely to go to 2%. And some are going back to get the approval, and which they will get, to go to 2%. After we're at 2%, we'll start talking about going higher. But I said ultimately we should be in years in advance, we should be at 4%. I think 4% is the right number.
All the countries,
now,
just one more clarification from what the president is saying, which is actually not connected to reality. All of the countries have committed to 2%. Bob Gates went over for Barack Obama several years ago. Since then, the spending has increased, and we're going to be showing you charts to show that actually European defense spending has increased at a faster rate than U.S. defense spending since 2011. Now back to the president.
But right now we're getting people up to 2%, and that'll take place over a fairly short period of time, a short number of years. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Tomislav Krasnec from Večernji List, Croatian daily newspaper. We understand your message.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you. We understand your message, but some people ask themselves, will you be tweeting differently once you board the Air Force One? Thank you.
No, that's other people that do that. I don't. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Jeremy Diamond with CNN. How are you?
Questionable genius.
Quick question with regards to Germany and the comments that you made yesterday. Do you feel like, given the threats that you made about potentially leaving NATO, about insulting Germany's sovereignty, it appears, by suggesting they are totally controlled by Russia, do you feel like that's an effective way to conduct diplomacy? And secondly, would you be able to be a little bit more specific about the commitments that you secured today with regards to increasing financial commitment? Is there an updated timeline? Are there specific countries you could cite? Because a majority of them are already planning to meet that 2% threshold by 2024.
No, many of them. In fact, Germany was going to be in the year 2028 or 30. Yeah, I think it's a very effective way to deal, but I didn't deal exactly the way you said. I have great respect for Germany. My father's from Germany. Both of my parents are from the EU, despite the fact they don't treat us well on trade, but I think that'll change also. And I think we'll see that because on the 25th of July, they're coming in to start negotiations with me, as we'll see. And if they don't negotiate in good faith, we'll do something having to do with all of the millions of cars that are coming into our country and being taxed at a virtually zero level, at a very low level. But Jeremy, I think it's been a very effective way of negotiating, but I'm not negotiating. I just want fairness for the United States. We're paying for far too much of NATO. NATO is very important, but NATO is helping Europe more than it's helping us. At the same time, it's very good for us. So we have now got it to a point where people are paying a lot more money, and that's starting really last year. It really had, as you were there last year, and last year we had a big impact. Again, we took in $33 billion more, and if you ask Secretary General Stoltenberg, he gives us total credit, meaning me, I guess, in this case, total credit, because I said it was unfair. Now, what has happened is presidents over many years, from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, they came in, they said, okay, hey, do the best you can, and they left. Nobody did anything about it. And it got to a point where the United States was paying for 90% of NATO. And that's not fair. So it's changed. We had a really good meeting today. We had a great meeting in terms of getting along. I know most of the people in the room because of last year, because of the year and a half that we've been in office, year and a half plus, but we have a great relationship. Everybody in that room, by the time we left, got along, and they agreed to pay more, and they agreed to pay it more quickly.
That actually is false. Also, there are numerous quotes talking about how our allies are distressed by Donald Trump and the way he treats NATO allies. Also, again, let's state again that it was not Donald Trump that got European countries to start spending more on defense. Charts and the facts will show that actually they started in 2011 spending more per year as a rate of increase than the United States, and in part because of Bob Gates and Barack Obama's pressure. Now back to the president.
The numbers have gone up a lot, and they've gone up rapidly, and they're now going up further. So I think NATO is going to be very, very effective. I'm very impressed with, and really know, and he's a friend of mine, but Secretary General Stoltenberg has done a fantastic job and putting it all together. And we were the ones that really, we gave him an extension of his contract, as you know. I think he's done a really good job. I think that when I was saying that, I am very concerned with the pipeline. I don't like the pipeline. And when I talk about NATO, I say, how do you have NATO? And then you have somebody paying the people that you're protecting against. But maybe we'll get along with the group that we're protecting against. I think that's a real possibility. As you know, I'm meeting with President Putin on Monday. And I think we go into that meeting not looking for so much. We want to find out about Syria. We will, of course, ask your favorite question about meddling. I will be asking that question again. But we'll also be talking about other things. We'll be talking about Ukraine. Ukraine was here today, by the way. And, you know, it's very interesting to hear what they had to say. So, excuse me? Well, he may. I mean, look, he may. You know, what am I going to do? If he may deny it. I mean, it's one of those things. So all I can do is say, did you, and don't do it again. But he may deny. I mean, well, you'll be the first to know. Okay? Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
It's President Robert Wall with the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
If the Germans and the Canadians and others don't come up to 2%, what is your fallback position? How will you up the pressure to make them actually?
Well, they will. They will. I have no doubt about it. They all made commitments, and they will be up to 2%. It'll be over a relatively short period of years. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Yes, go ahead.
Georgian TV, Palestine News. Mr. President, what do you think today needs or not Georgia most support from NATO? And I want to ask about
Georgia. They were here today, represented.
Yes, and will you talk about Georgia in a meeting with with President Putin?
Well, they were here. They made a very favorable impression, and we listened to their plight. It's a tough situation with Georgia, but they made a very favorable impression in the room. Okay? Yeah, go ahead. Go.
One more.
Go ahead. Go.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you really did. Come on, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I had a question as well, but nonetheless, I'll ask her. Will you recognize?
Go ahead.
Will you recognize Russia's will you recognize Crimea as part of Russia when you meet President?
That's an interesting question because, you know, long before I got here, President Obama allowed that to happen. That was on his watch, not on my watch. You know, people like to say, oh, Crimea, but the fact is they built bridges to Crimea. They just opened a big bridge that was started years ago. They built, I think, a submarine port, substantially added billions of dollars. So that was on Barack Obama's watch. That was not on Trump's watch. Would I have allowed it to happen? No, I would not have allowed it to happen. But he did allow it to happen. So that was his determination. What will happen with Crimea from this point on, that I can't tell you. But I'm not happy about Crimea. But again, that was Barack Obama's watch, not Trump's watch. Yeah, go ahead, sure.
Jeff Mason from Reuters, sure. Mr. President.
No, Jeff.
Regarding your summit with President Putin, will you be raising arms control issues? Would you like
yes.
to? Would you like to extend New START? And will you raise concerns about violations of the INF Treaty?
Yes.
And as a follow-up to the NATO meeting today, will you suggest to him or would you consider stopping military exercises in the Baltic states if that's something that he requests?
Well, perhaps we'll talk about that. But I will say that we are going to be talking about those three issues and many more. We'll be talking about it, Jeff. Okay? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Ivo Caizzi, Corriere della Sera. We are in the NATO headquarters that costed almost the double as planned before. I would like to know if you are planning to guarantee the taxpayers that the new money that is flowing into NATO will be spent in the best possible way, especially the money coming from countries that have several problems with the public finances.
Well, the money will be spent properly, and one of the things that we have many wealthy countries with us today, but we have some that aren't so wealthy, and they did ask me if they could buy the military equipment, and could I help them out, and we will help them out a little bit. We're not going to finance it for them, but we'll make sure that they're able to get payments and various other things so they can buy, because the United States makes, by far, the best military equipment in the world, the best jets, the best missiles,
just for,
the best guns,
viewers
the best
and
everything.
listeners who are confused, Donald Trump continually,
I guess I assumed it prior to taking office, but I really learned
that
since being president,
individual military budgets
so
from individual countries flow into NATO. They do not. There are two separate things. There are that question pertained to the 2% that individual countries would be paying for their defense budget. and then you have money that comes into NATO, and we are not talking about that. The United States pays about 66% of military budgets and only about 22% of NATO's own budget. It's a pretty good investment. Back to the questions.
Express any specific concerns or talk to you about any messages that they'd like you to take with you when you go to the summit?
Just the opposite of concern. They actually, and they'll probably come out with a little bit of an edict, but they actually thanked me for meeting with President Putin. I look forward to the meeting. They thanked me. They thought it was a great thing that I was doing it, and they gave us our best wishes, or their best wishes. Now, with that being said, we'll see what happens. Just a loose meeting. It's not going to be big schedule. I don't think it should take a very long period of time, and we'll see where it leads. But it could lead to something very productive, and maybe it's not. But I think meeting with people is great. We had a great meeting with Chairman Kim, and I'll tell you, Mike Pompeo did a fantastic job. I might ask you to say a few words, Mike, while you're here. Just 1 second. Mike, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. So I did. I returned, actually came straight from North Korea with a couple of stops here to Brussels. We had a productive conversation. There remains a great deal of work to do, but I think most importantly, my counterpart Kim Yong-chol made a commitment consistent with what President Trump was able to achieve with Chairman Kim, which was they intend to denuclearize, they're going to accomplish it, and now the task is to get it implemented.
I think just to finish on that, it's so important. That was an amazing, really an amazing meeting, I thought. And I really think that we established very good relationships. We'll see where it all lands, but there have been no missile tests. There have been no research. They have blown up a site. I hear they're blowing up another site, missile site. They've taken down all of the propaganda. In fact, somebody said there's no more music playing at the borderline. The music was going on for many years. They said recently that, wow, there's no more of the heavy music and the propaganda. They've done a lot of things, and we got back our 3 hostages. So it's a good process. But the main thing is there have been no rocket launches. There have been no missile tests. There's been no nuclear tests, no explosions, no nothing for almost 9 months. Okay. Yeah, please. Sure.
Ewan McCaskill from The Guardian. Your trip to the UK, there are lots of protests planned in London and elsewhere. How do you feel about that?
I think it's fine. I mean, I think they like me a lot in the UK. I think they agree with me on immigration. I'm very strong on immigration. I made a point today. I said, you've got to stop. You're ruining you're going to have a lot of problems. You see what's going on throughout the world with immigration. I probably at least partially won an election because of immigration. If you look at Italy, Giuseppe, who I got to know quite well over the last month and a half, he won his election because of strong immigration policies on Italy. I think that a lot of the people in the UK, I think that's why Brexit happened. Now, I don't know what's going on with the negotiation, who knows, and I guess that's become a very interesting point of contention. I said I'm going to a few hot spots. We have NATO, then we have the UK, and then we have Putin. And I said, Putin may be the easiest of them all. You never know. But I'm going to a pretty hot spot right now, right, with a lot of resignations. But I will say that immigration is a very important thing, and I told them today
the president has said he's very popular and he's liked in Britain. In fact, he has the lowest rating ever of any first-year president since the records have been taken. And according to YouGov's polling, only 11% of Britons believe that Trump is doing a good job. 67% believe he is a poor president. Now back to the president.
Well, I think he's going to see about this summit. This has turned out to be a very successful summit. This is, I think really that NATO is more put together right now, is more coordinated, and I think there's a better spirit for NATO right now than perhaps they've ever had. It's richer than it ever was. The commitments are made at a higher level than they've ever been made, and the money to be paid out faster, far faster. You know, the 2% was a range, a goal. It wasn't something that they were committed to. Now it's a commitment. There's a big difference, the 2% number. And that's why so many people weren't reaching it or hitting it. It was just sort of like this amorphous number out there. Now it's a commitment, a real commitment. I think he's going to see that there's great unity, great spirit, great esprit de corps, and I think we're going to have a good meeting. Regardless of that, I think we're going to have a good meeting. But this was a fantastic 2 days. This was a really fantastic. It all came together at the end. And yes, it was a little tough for a little while, but ultimately, you can ask anybody at that meeting. They're really liking what happened over the last 2 days. There's a great, great spirit leaving that room. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jonathan Beale from BBC. I just wonder, you think you're going to get along with President Putin at that meeting? Could you just tell us, why do you think that? Is there something you admire about him? And the second question, because you're just about to go to the UK.
Well, he's a competitor. He's been very nice to me the times I've met him. I've been nice to him. He's a competitor. You know, somebody was saying, is he an enemy? He's not my enemy. Is he a friend? No, I don't know him well enough. But the couple of times that I've gotten to meet him, we got along very well. You saw that. I hope we get along well. I think we get along well. But ultimately, he's a competitor. He's representing Russia. I'm representing the United States. So, in a sense, we're competitors. Not a question of friend or enemy. He's not my enemy. And hopefully someday, maybe he'll be a friend. It could happen. But I just don't know him very well. I've met him a couple of times, and when I did meet him, most of you people were there. Yes.
And Brexit, sorry, sir, because you are going to the UK. What will be your message on Brexit?
Well, Brexit is, you know, I've been reading a lot about Brexit over the last couple of days, and it seems to be turning a little bit differently, where they're getting at least partially involved back with the European Union. I have no message. It's not for me to say. I own a lot of property there. I'm going to Scotland while I wait for the meeting. I have Turnberry in Scotland, which is a magical place, one of my favorite places. I'm going there for 2 days while I wait for the Monday meeting. But it's not for me to say what they should be doing in the UK. I have great friendships. My mother was born in Scotland. I have great friendships over there. We have a wonderful ambassador, Woody Johnson, and he's doing it. By the way, Woody's doing a great job. But it's not for me to say. I'd like to see him be able to work it out so it could go quickly, whatever they work out. Is it heartbreaking? Oh, hard Brexit, I said.
Nothing about Iraq.
I thought you said it was heartbreaking.
About Iraqi issue.
I said that might be going a little bit too far, right? Heartbreaking. Is it heartbreaking? A lot of things are heartbreaking. No, I would say that, you know, Brexit is Brexit. It's not like I guess when you use the term hard Brexit, I assume that's what you mean. The people voted to break it up. So I would imagine that's what they'll do, but maybe they're taking a little bit of a different route. So I don't know if that's what they voted for. I just want the people to be happy. They're great people. And I do think sure there'll be protests, because there are always protests, but I think there were protests the night of the election both ways. But in the end, we got 306 electoral votes. And one state that, you know, is interesting, one of the states we won, Wisconsin. I didn't even realize this until fairly recently. That was the one state that Ronald Reagan didn't win when he ran the board. His second time, he didn't win Wisconsin, and we won Wisconsin. So, you know, we had a great night. Protests, there might be protests, but I believe that the people in the UK.
Oh boy.
The president,
Ireland,
of course, wrong again. I don't know how many times he can get this wrong. In 1984, Ronald Reagan won 49 states, including Wisconsin. He only lost to Walter Mondale's Minnesota. The president continuing to lie
on the world stage
about basic election results, American results. Ronald Reagan, again, for the 15th time, White House staff, Ronald Reagan won Wisconsin in 1984. Richard Nixon won Wisconsin as well. You don't have to go back to Dwight Eisenhower. Again, he once again lies about election results. Now, back to the president's press conference already in progress.
To every disease known to mankind or womankind. That would be my ultimate, okay? And we'll start from there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Me. There's Mahjouba Nawrouzi from Afghan service in BBC World Service. So I would like to ask you, Mr. President, that Afghan president is going to be here.
He's here right now.
He's here. And are you going to meet him? And what have you got to say to him? And when the war is going to end in Afghanistan, because people are fed up now and they want to know.
I agree with that. I very much agree. It's been going on for a long time. We've made a lot of progress, but it's been going on for a long time. We've made a lot of progress in Afghanistan, I will say. Yes, your president is here right now. In fact, he's in the room. When I'm finished with this, I'm going right back into that room.
One question, please. Georgian Public Broadcaster, Mr. President, can you tell us what do you think about future membership of Georgia in NATO, please?
Well, at a certain point, they'll have a chance. Not right now. They just left the room. But at a certain point, they'll have a chance. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Barza Hassan, reporter for Kurdistan 24. Are you going to continue to support the Kurdish forces, Peshmerga, in Iraq? Thank you.
I think the Kurds are great people. They're incredible fighters. They're wonderful, warm, intelligent allies in many cases. As you know, it's different groups of people, but they're great people. I believe they're great people. Yes, go ahead, please.
Mr. President,
the Kurds also help us defeat ISIS in Syria. Now back to the president.
Isn't an enemy, isn't a friend, it's just a competitor.
Competitor.
Do you consider him as a security threat for Europe or to the U.S.? Thank you.
Hey, I don't want him to be, and that's, I guess, why we have NATO. And that's why we have a United States that just had the largest military budget ever, $700 billion approved, $716 billion next year. No, I hope that we'll be able to get along. I've said from day one, whether it's China or Russia, you know, we're working on trade with China right now. And I don't say that's an easy situation, because that's been years of abuse of the United States by presidents, frankly, that allowed that to happen. So I've taken over a lot of bad hands, and I'm fixing each one of them, and I'm fixing them well. But China is going to be, I think, very successfully ultimately taken care of. I have a great respect for their president, as you know. President Xi spent 2 days there. It was among the most magical 2 days I've ever lived. And I think we're going to end up doing something very good with China. Right now we're in a pretty nasty trade battle, but I think ultimately that'll work out. I really think we have a big advantage. You know, we picked up $8 trillion in value and worth since I became president, and we're close to 2 times the size of China. A lot of people don't know that. And, you know, we're going to negotiate a fair deal if that's possible. Okay. And Russia, I think getting along with Russia also would be a very good thing. Yes, go ahead.
Jamal Musawi from BBC Persian TV. We have seen escalation of tension between you and the Iranians. What is your exit plan, Mr. President?
I would say there might be an escalation between us and the Iranians. I agree with
They are threatening...
By the way, they're treating us with much more respect right now than they did in the past. And I know they're having a lot of problems and their economy is collapsing. But I will tell you this, at a certain point, they're going to call me and they're going to say, let's make a deal. And we'll make a deal. But they're feeling a lot of pain right now. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Wait. Mr. President, do you expect the rise of the Russian influence in Macedonia following the starting of negotiation process like we've seen in Montenegro with alleged coup? And what will NATO and United States do to counter that Russian influence in the Western Balkans?
We never talk about our future plans. Yes, go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. My name is Ala Shali from Rodat TV from Kurdistan, Iraq. My question is about the government of Iraq. You know, after 2 months election, the government in Iraq has not been formed. What's the role from USA? And you want to talk about Syria with President Putin. Can I have any information about Kurds in Syria? Thank you very much.
So I hope we get along well with Iraq. We've certainly spent a great fortune in Iraq and many, many lives, thousands and hundreds of thousands of lives, if you think on both sides, which I always think about both sides, not just our side. And they had an election, and I hope we're going to be able to get along, and we'll see how that goes. We've already been talking to the people that won the election. I was not in favor of that war. I was very much against that war. I never thought it was a good thing, but that's another deck of cards that I inherited, and we'll do the best we can with it. I think
obviously, as many of you know, the president, then Donald Trump, in 2003, the lead up to the Iraq War, took several positions on the Iraq War. One day he was for it, one day he was against it. Now back to the president.
From Sabah newspaper in Tunisia. I come from a very far country, a small country in northern Africa, Tunisia. My question, Mr. President, we really admire what you are doing in North Africa, and we really wish and hope that something again will be done in the Middle East to avoid more wars and more blood and more killings in the Middle East with a just peace process that gives everyone its...
We're looking for peace, and Africa, as you know, is it's on our very strong list. But we're looking for peace. We want peace all over. We want to solve problems. We're looking for peace. Africa right now has got problems like few people would even understand. They have things going on there that nobody could believe in this room. If you saw some of the things that I see through intelligence, what's going on in Africa, it is so sad. It's so vicious and violent. And we want peace. We want peace for Africa. We want peace all over the world. That's my #1 goal, peace all over the world. And we're building up a tremendous military because I really believe through strength you get peace. But we're going to have a military like we've never had before. We've given out orders for, you know, the best fighter jets in the world, the best ships, the best everything. But hopefully we'll never have to use them. That would be a dream. To buy the best stuff, to have the best stuff, to have the best equipment in the world, and to never have to use it would be a really great part of my dream. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to be leaving in about a half an hour. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats while a delegation...
That's the President of the United States delivering about a 20-minute press conference after a tense NATO summit. The President, as John Meacham has pointed out many times, told staff members before the inauguration, the day before the inauguration, that every day was to be treated like a reality TV show. It's not really hard to see how the President decided to frame the apprentice NATO. He yesterday started out with a fiery speech, hyperbolic, insulting all of our NATO allies. And now, a little more than 24 hours later, the President comes and delivers a press conference, neatly wrapping things up and declaring what can only be called a false peace. Also, he made a lot of false statements in there. The first, he said that Donald Trump forced a 2% commitment. We're going to be going around the table and explaining to you why that's just not true. It is false. It is a lie. Second main theme was, quote, "We are more unified than ever before," also a lie. A series of quotes from NATO leaders suggesting that this was the most turbulent and tense NATO summit ever conducted. And three, people have stepped up and committed more than ever. He also continually, Steve Ratner, and we can go to your chart here because I think it would be helpful. He continually said that Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, past presidents were not able to make commitments to get the Europeans to start spending more money. Willie, I think you told me in 2011, it was 2011 that Bob Gates?
Yeah, June of 2011, Defense Secretary Bob Gates went to this NATO summit in Brussels and talked about a two-tiered system, countries that are paying in and countries that are not paying in but benefiting from the payments in the defense of the larger countries. So he started to rattle that cage of, you guys need to start paying up.
And that was in 2011. And here we are talking again. And because the President does not understand how this works, because he didn't from the beginning and he seems to blur the two different budgets, we are now talking about individual military budgets from individual countries. As far as the overall NATO budget goes, Ian Brzezinski, in fact, wrote a piece for the Atlantic Council that talked about how the United States only pays 22% of NATO's budget and of NATO's actual budget. And as he wrote in the Atlantic Council piece, pretty good investment for what we get out of NATO. What Donald Trump's talking about, though, overall, is not contributions into NATO. He kept saying, we got $40 billion coming into the coffers of NATO. He said things like that before. Just not true. We're talking about individual commitments. But starting with Bob Gates' demand that they start paying more money to the military budgets, let's take a look at what's happened since 2011 to show that actually the die was cast actually the same year that Donald Trump began his birther conspiracy campaign. I'm dead serious. It began 5 years before he began running for president.
Steve.
Okay, so let's take a look at the facts. So, as Joe said, if you go back to 2011, you can see that the Europeans, which are in blue.
Wait, we're in blue, right? Because that's more, right? The blue is, we're spending more money than the Europeans?
I mean, well, no, it's the other way around.
Oh, okay.
And this is the rate of growth of spending. And so that you can see that the Europeans, who were actually, as we were, cutting their defense budgets in the sort of post-Iraq war period, started to increase them very substantially, more substantially than we did over this period. And so in the most recent year, for example, they're going to increase their budget by 4.8%, and we're going to increase our budget by 0.7%. So in fact, they are increasing their budgets. There was a commitment made in 2014 to get to 2% by 2024. 4 countries are there now. 8 countries will be there next year. They won't necessarily all get there, but they will get a majority, a good majority of them over that limit by 2024.
Very interesting. That means, Willie, that actually Europe this year alone is increasing, accelerating their defense spending 5 times the amount of the United States, and that has been, just like the U.S. economy that Donald Trump tries to take credit for, that has been the case for 7 years.
It's been the case for 7 years, and in fact, the commitment to 2% spending goes back to 2006 when George W. Bush was president. So the commitment the president just announced, he created, as you said, he framed it this way. He said, there's this big problem. I'm going to go in and soften the ground. I'm going to go in through sheer force of will and negotiating talent. I'm going to come out with a deal. So he comes out today and says, I got the deal. And Jonathan Lemire's question got to this. He said, well, what was the deal? Did you get them up to 4%? He said, no, they've committed to 2%. They committed to 2% in 2006.
Right.
And then he kind of walked back even further.
That was 12 years ago.
Yeah, he walked back even further and said, but now they do have to go back and deal with their parliaments and their congresses, so hopefully they'll get to the 2% eventually. So he's announcing something that was announced 12 years ago.
Willie, I mean, it's unbelievable. And Mika, to let you know how long ago that was, 12 years ago. I mean, 12 years ago, we in Scarborough country were digging into the Passion of the Christ and playing half of Jon Stewart's show and asking if Jon Stewart was bad for America. And then at the end we'd go, no, he's not bad for America. But we got to play half the show.
Yes, well, that was
pretty
the show.
good for the ratings.
And I will say the fact checking on NATO has been, you know, really fascinating throughout this press conference because he was wrong so many times and forcefully wrong. His last answer, question about Africa, we could not fact check because it literally made no sense. He was blithering at that point.
He actually said, I like peace, Africa.
It was hard to break through. But as for NATO, it's very similar to the border separation issue. He creates a problem.
Right.
He creates a policy and creates a fight over it, and has absolutely no plan moving forward. And we've got, hundreds, possibly thousands of children hanging in the balance, some who will be orphaned because of this policy, and he's now trying to take credit for fixing it. He's trying to take credit for fixing something with NATO, and quite frankly, the incompetence that this president has shown in terms of the separation policy, we should be frightened about the damage he's doing on the world stage.
Well, what's so fascinating, Steve Ratner, and then can't wait to get Juan and David in on this, so we'll just go over a few more numbers. What's so fascinating is Donald Trump took credit for a 2% commitment that George W. Bush got in 2006, and then took credit for pressuring Europe to spend more money, which Bob Gates actually got started, just look at your chart, in 2011.
It's all true. Let me just show you two other things that I think that you'll find interesting. One that you've talked about a lot this week, I noticed, was how much Europe spends in relation to other countries. And so if you look at this chart, you can see that this is just the European part of NATO, that they actually spend more on defense than any other country in the world. More than China, more than Russia, more than India. And so if you're worried about Russia, you can see that NATO Europe alone spends almost 5 times as much on defense as Russia does.
And again, this is, let's keep this chart up, because there is such ignorance that and misinformation that is promoted by Donald Trump. I bet if you went to one of Donald Trump's rallies, after Americans listened to what Donald Trump said, I will bet you 99% of those people walking out, if asked who spends more money on their budget, Europe, China, or Russia, defense budget, Europe might get 1%. NATO Europe remains, as we've been saying, a bulwark against Putin's expansionism into Western Europe. Just as NATO Europe stopped the Soviets from moving west into Western Europe. And so it is just like the border crisis that Donald Trump made up during the campaign, suggesting that Mexicans were flooding in and taking our jobs when there was actually a negative net flow from the United States going back into Mexico.
I have one more fact check for you on Donald Trump. He talks about this 4% that he wants the Europeans to get to. Let's take a look at how that 4% compares to what we're doing. So the 4% is this red line up here, and you can see that we are peaking at about 3.7%. And if you look at our longer-term budget projections, our defense spending is actually going to go down to 2.7%. So we're never going to get to 4%. We're never going to get anywhere near 4%. In fact, we're going to head back to the 2%
so what's he talking about?
that we want the others to do. So why is he asking the others to do 4%? And can I make one last point that my wife asked me to make to you? It's not all about defense spending. If you look at humanitarian assistance around the world, the Europeans spend twice as much as we do. They spend $12 billion assistance. We spend $6 billion a year on humanitarian assistance.
And that's called soft power.
Soft power.
That stops revolutions. That stops Al-Qaeda insurgencies. That stops ISIS insurgencies. That actually saves us money and saves people's lives. David Ignatius, so much to talk about here. Why don't we just throw it to you? Tell us what was your takeaway, your main takeaways from Donald Trump's press conference?
Joe, I thought this was a classic Donald Trump performance over the last 2 days. He blows into Brussels. He's abrasive on the basis of inaccurate facts. He attacks our European allies, and then 24 hours later, he's Mr. Sunshine. He was as upbeat in that press conference this morning as I've seen him, and announces victory. And I've solved all these terrible problems that I was worried about yesterday, and he has a series of inaccurate or semi-accurate comments. But suddenly we got the best relationship with NATO we've ever had, and they love me, and our relationship with Germany is terrific. And it was an absolutely classic example of how he operates. Come in, turn up all the furniture over, and then boast about how successful you've been in, people picking up the mess that you created. I do think that when he talks about going to meet with Vladimir Putin from a standpoint of strength in NATO, he is not listening to the voices of NATO leaders. They are genuinely anxious about America's long-term commitment to their security, no matter what he said this morning. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this very fractious summit. It's not the press conference at the end, but all the things he said along the way, which burn and which people will remember. As one German newspaper said, this is not a crisis, this is a catastrophe. That was their reaction to what was being said yesterday. I think another important point of news was when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talked about the status of his negotiations with the North Koreans who were reporting to Kim Jong-un, and he said that on the road toward working out a denuclearization formula. The language that he used was a little bit vague. He said they intend to denuclearize. They're going to accomplish it. I didn't hear any specific timeline. I didn't hear the kind of hard commitments that we've been looking for. And so it's obvious that Pompeo is in a process of exploring how, over time, North Korea is going to meet this, what sounded like such a firm commitment at the Singapore summit.
A firm commitment. Yeah, I was going to say a firm commitment, which this past week, when it was repeated, made the North Koreans call us gangsters. So David, I think it's very interesting. You underline the disunity there. The president said, quote, "We are more unified than ever before." I know you make it your practice. It is your job to talk to ambassadors and leaders across not only Europe, but the globe. Give us their reactions to what they've seen over the past several days, and whether NATO was, as the president said, quote, "more unified than ever before."
Well, I think the reactions to the initial drop the bomb phase yesterday, reactions were very negative. People used sharp language in responding to President Trump. The reaction to the NATO summit as a whole may be, okay, this is how he does it. It's a very disruptive beginning, and then we pretty much go by the script, and he claims credit for a win. What the sum total of this is going to be is hard to predict. And I think it'll depend in large part on whether he does things in his summit meeting with Vladimir Putin that European leaders find threatening to their security interests. President Trump has to be very careful. He's bargaining their security as he talks about Ukraine. He's bargaining the security of the whole of the Middle East when he talks about Syria. So I think we'll all be watching very carefully for the commitments he makes. He wants these things to be successes so he can claim a win.
Yeah.
He wanted Brussels to be a success, and he just told us how wonderful it was. Hard to square the language with what he said before. He'll want the Helsinki summit with Putin to be a win, but we'll have to look very carefully. What did he give up to get that aura of success?
Yeah.
The president also, it's worth noting, Mika, ignored two questions about the Kurds, who have done remarkable work in Iraq and Syria in helping us in our efforts to push back and defeat ISIS. He also ignored a question on whether Georgia could, a country that Vladimir Putin invaded back in 2008, whether Georgia could expect to receive NATO membership, and also ignored a question on whether he would recognize the invasion of Crimea and the annexation of that country.
He definitely sidestepped that and brought Mike Pompeo to the microphone to talk about North Korea, and that was fascinating. There were a few times also it was kind of clear the president really didn't know the answer to the question or didn't understand the terminology being used.
He was asked about hard Brexit. He says, "I just want everyone to be happy."
Yeah. Joining us now, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's the author of the forthcoming book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. Also with us, the host of MSNBC's The Last Word, Lawrence O'Donnell.
Who also just wants everybody.
He just wants peace. And political reporter for The Washington Post, moderator of Washington Week on PBS, Robert Costa. Good to have you all on board this morning. We've been fact-checking the president in real time. It's all we can do as we cover this story because it's a little bit too difficult to let an entire set of lies over the course of 40 minutes go across the airwaves around the world without fact-checking something that is clearly wrong. So this president, Doris, has a real way with the truth here. And on the world stage, have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, what really makes me sad, I was thinking about this trip that he's about to go now to England and what a special relationship, as John knows, the United States had forever with England. I mean, starting with Churchill giving that speech about the Iron Curtain where he talked about the special relationship. And I think
he says he's very popular in England. He says he's very popular there.
Fact check,
what really
11%.
means is trust. What really means is you establish a relationship so that, like when Churchill and Roosevelt are together, they say it's fun to be in the same decade with you. I wish I could be with you all the time. When Roosevelt dies and Churchill says, I don't know what I'm going to do without that man. He's the truest, farthest vision of anybody. And that relationship cemented Lend-Lease, where we did do things and gave a lot of things to a lot of people, and it won the war. Russia was first our adversary and then became our friend. Things move around. Do you remember, John, when supposedly when Churchill had to explain why suddenly he was for Russia? Because Germany had invaded Russia. So he said, if Germany invaded hell, I'd have to say a good word about the devil. So adversaries and allies get along together. But still, the idea of developing trust and having your friends and your allies be with you as they've been with us for the last 70 years, and then saying those things and thinking you can turn it around. Trust is the most important thing which he's lost with these other people, no matter what they say.
Lawrence O'Donnell.
You know, Joe, I just want to thank you for the job you did in the live coverage of the speech.
Live fact check.
The live fact check, which I needed. I mean, I don't know what his approval rating is in England. I don't have that in my head. But
it is 11%, the lowest ever recorded for a first-year president.
But what was it like sitting here with that kind of challenge, with all of this coming at you and trying to
so
pick,
much to choose
you had
from.
to pick exactly which one of these you jump in on, and that's actually what I was kind of marveling at, was when do you jump in and what do you let slide? It's a tough thing to get through.
It's really a tough thing for all of us, and I'm sure all of us have to figure out, what do we let pass? Like, for instance, it's very interesting. At this stage, I never read his tweets unless they make headlines. It's not like I'm saying I'm not going to read his tweets. I know he's going to insult our allies. I know he's going to insult people.
Yeah.
I know they're going to be racially tinged. I know what he's going to do. And I think it's just it's our responsibility to sift through and figure out what matters. And also just how easily he lies. They love me in Britain. No, they actually loathe you.
There's the balloon with the Trump baby flying over.
If you hadn't done that, we would then have to be replaying every bit of this tape after the fact, trying to catch up with 40 minutes of this material. I mean, the way you did it is the only way that makes any sense to me.
I think actually, Willie, we all should try to figure out how to do this in real time, where we don't interfere with the news that comes out of the press conference, but we do get people the real facts in real time. Because if he gets a 40-minute block, that's how he succeeds. It's one lie on top of another lie on top of another lie on top of another lie, and pretty soon it's hard to untangle all those lies in a way that viewers and Trump supporters can digest.
Well, he lays the foundation for a narrative that he wants to continue in a moment like that, when he has the stage. So the narrative he was creating today was that there was a problem. He came in, he beat everybody up, he walked out solving it, and now NATO, he says, is a fine-tuned machine. Well, that's not true. He's telling a story that's not true. So before that foundation can set, before the concrete can set, you've got to pick it apart so that the people watching the show, the people of the country, understand why it's so shaky.
You know, Bob Costa, it seems every time you come on the show, I ask what Republicans on the Hill are going to do about the latest I don't know what to call it, just aberration that comes from the White House on policy, or the latest misstatement from the president. But I must say, over the past few days, Republicans on the Hill have actually come out in steadfast support for our NATO alliance. We've also seen the Secretary of State do the same. Of course, Secretary of State Mattis said when Donald Trump was attacking NATO in the past, NATO was so important that if there weren't a NATO, we would have to create one. So it does seem, in this one area, almost all of Washington is standing shoulder to shoulder with our allies instead of the president.
And they are also watching very closely the president's relationship with the United Kingdom, because they say, yes, there is a relationship with the West and with NATO, but so many of these lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats here in Washington, are often seen at the British Embassy, are supporters of the special relationship. They see themselves as Anglophiles, and they know that Theresa May's government, the Tory government, is in a fragile political moment, maybe looking to make a deal with the United States on trade, and they wonder, will this president take that same transactional approach without talking so much about history or moral values, just the transaction? Will he take that same approach to a nation they really value in the U.S. foreign policy community, the UK?
John Meacham.
There's also going to be a very highly symbolic moment in the next couple of days. He's going to Blenheim Palace, which is where in November of 1874
that just comes out of his head.
That's so good.
November 30th.
By the way, you say that just comes out of his head. Do you know, for about 40 minutes, he practiced that in front of his mirror
Yeah.
at the Holiday Inn
No, I
Suites?
whispered it in his ear.
Okay, but I want to hear.
But go ahead.
Exactly.
Good. You
Please.
practiced this. Let's see how you
ready?
pull it off.
Okay.
Here it comes.
Winston Churchill was born. 7.5 month, very large premature baby. So Lord Randolph,
a huge
fairly
head,
frisky. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so he's gonna try to become Churchill here. So get ready for this. And there is a great, and I didn't practice this, I swear, but there's a great Churchill line from 1942. When he was facing a vote of confidence in the House of Commons. Things were going terribly. Singapore had fallen. And Churchill lays out the importance of truth, to go to Lawrence's point, in politics. He said, the British people can face any misfortune with fortitude and buoyancy as long as they are convinced that those who are in charge of their affairs are not deceiving them or are not themselves dwelling in a fool's paradise. Mm-hmm. It's a two-pronged test.
Right.
He's not lying to us, and he's not lying to himself. Right. Trump fails both those.
Well, and I do believe people talk as if this fever that we're going through is going to last. I don't believe it will. And I do believe at the end of the day, it will be his inability to tell the truth to the American people and himself that will bring him down politically.
Well, do you know, Joe, we have a certain miniature narrative that you presented today about what he said and what's actually true. That's the larger problem that I think the country has to fight right now. The narrative that's being presented about what's happening with the Supreme Court, what's happening with the last 50 years of social justice, what's going on in the country right now, unless that narrative is countered, the one that he's giving the people, then we really do have a problem. Public sentiment is everything in this country. Mm-hmm. As Lincoln said, with public sentiment, you have everything. Without it, you have nothing. And the narrative has to be rewritten by the people who are against Trump right now, and he's winning the narrative in a lot of ways.
Well, let's bring Leon Panetta into the conversation. He served as White House Chief of Staff to President Clinton and then CIA Director and Secretary of Defense under President Obama. So quite a perspective you'll have to the dynamics going on at the NATO summit from a Chief of Staff's point of view. I'd love to hear that. But also from the point of view of a Secretary of Defense, what do you do with the president who goes rogue with the facts on the world stage?
Well, we've never seen anything like this, certainly in my lifetime. And I think the problem is that in the end, this is about protecting our national security. It's about our foreign policy abroad. And it's built on pillars that have been established for 70 or more years, pillars of truth, pillars of respect, pillars of strength, pillars of a willingness to cooperate with others. This president basically went in to NATO and attacked every one of those pillars, and I think has undermined the kind of fundamental trust you need in order to be able to protect our national security. That's what people need to focus on.
Secretary Panetta, it's Willie Geist. Your comparison is one that a lot of people have made, which is that there is an argument that these countries have to live up to the 2% threshold, and many of them are not. But as you've said, this isn't a country club where some members aren't paying their dues. This is a 70-year-old body that has protected the West, that has historical importance that the president doesn't seem to understand.
No, Secretary Gates has raised this issue with regards to 2%. I raised it when I was Secretary of Defense. Others have raised it, and obviously it was a concern that they ought to be contributing more to that relationship. But it's an alliance. It is a national security alliance. As I said, it's not a country club where you pay fees and then get rid of members. It's an alliance, a military alliance. And the reality is that the president ignores the history of that alliance and what it's done in terms of fighting the Soviet Union, bringing down the walls in Germany, helping us after 9/11, continuing to help us in Afghanistan. NATO is important to our national security. And very frankly, this president is about marketing himself as opposed to dealing with what history is about. He wants to go in, he wants to show that he's a bully, he can threaten people, and that the only reason they're responding is because he's threatening them. That's the act that the president's engaged in here. And my concern is it undermines the trust of those we need if we ever have to face a national security threat.
Right. Lawrence O'Donnell.
Leon, Lawrence O'Donnell, I know you've had this moment with presidents before, and that is the moment where you have a very limited amount of time and you're trying to get through to a president on something that you disagree with in a way that you're trying to steer the president in a different direction. If you could have a moment like that with President Trump, if you could have yesterday, for example, what would you have boiled it down to in trying to convey to him what you think he should be trying to accomplish at that summit?
Well, this president, as he did today, taking credit for those nations that have increased their contribution to NATO, I think he does deserve some credit. But he should have started the NATO conference by taking credit for that and then supporting the fact that the NATO alliance is strong, that the United States is committed to it, and that it will continue to provide the security needs for the world. He didn't have to go in and do the attacks that he did yesterday, which undermines the main storyline. So he had to come back today to try to see if he could put that storyline back together again. I think if you're a president that is really trying to pay attention to how you can best present the position of the United States, he could have done a hell of a better job by beginning with a victory speech rather than trying to attack our allies.
Bob Costa?
Secretary Panetta, what do you believe the Russians are going to, and President Putin are going to try to get out of this meeting with President Trump?
Well, I worry about this meeting with Putin because, again, I think that this president walks into these meetings without looking at history, without looking at the fact that he's dealing with an adversary of the United States. The Russians are trying to undermine the stability of the United States. That's been their goal. They're undermining the stability of our Western allies. They are an adversary. I don't think he sees Putin in that light, and therefore he's going to go there a little bit like going into the Kim meeting, shaking hands, showing the world that two large leaders of big countries can come together. And I think Putin will take advantage of that to show the world that, frankly, he can have his way with the United States. That's the problem I'm concerned with, because we've shown weakness here in this NATO conference, and now we're going to go to Russia and show weakness with Putin. That is a terrible message to send the world.
So we have been serving as fact checker to Donald Trump. We have someone also helping us out here who happens to run France. Willie, breaking news.
Well, this is extraordinary. We watched a 40-minute press conference where the President Trump declared that he'd changed NATO and got everybody to pay up and pay more money. French President Macron has just denied President Trump's claim that NATO powers agreed to increase defense spending beyond previous targets. So he watched that press conference and said, I didn't agree to any of that.
And now Donald Trump will tweet against him, as he did against Trudeau, maybe accusing the French of scuffing their shoes to try to make them sound old.
The president knows that
so
Macron does not care.
Mr. Secretary,
silly.
You know, people like you who have committed your lives to this country, I know you have great respect for others who have done the same, and you understand the difficult walk that they all have to make, the difficult journey. I just wonder what your thoughts are when you see a man who served this country so proudly, in John Kelly, and served this country proudly as your military assistant, sacrificed his own son and then had to sit through what John Kelly had to sit through yesterday and grimaced as the President of the United States was tearing our NATO alliance to shreds, and then have the White House claim that he was angry because he is such a petulant small man that he didn't like the cheese that they were serving. My gosh, I just, what do you even say to that? How do you even deal? How does John Kelly even deal in that environment?
You know, I think that the key to leadership in this country, and I recognize, you know, every president has had to be political, has had to deal with situations, but truth is the fundamental ingredient as to whether our democracy will work or not. If we're not speaking the truth, if we're constantly telling untruths to the American people and to the world, then we undermine our democracy. And in that moment, while the president is ranting at that breakfast, I'm sure John Kelly is thinking, what damage is this doing to our country and to our alliance? Because he's a Marine, he's a first-class soldier, he's dedicated to this country. I think when he hears that kind of comment, it probably turns his insides, you know, into a grinder because he's seeing our country being hurt. And that's the concern that I have. This president, for all of the entertainment value of this president, he is doing incredible damage to the integrity of the United States.
John Meacham.
Mr. Secretary, as someone who has dealt with intelligence and had to create theories of the case, help us think about the allegations, the various speculations about President Trump and possible influence by the Russian state or Russian interests on both the campaign and possibly the presidency going forward. How should we think about that?
Well, it's obvious that that our intelligence agencies have clearly established that the Russians tried to interfere in our election process. And the intelligence that I've seen in the time that I was there, and I'm sure the president continues to see, shows that Russia continues to try to undermine the security of our country. And yet the president acts as if those threats are not serious, that when Russia says they had nothing to do with the attacks on our election system, he says, I believe them. And it raises a real concern about whether or not this president truly appreciates the fact that he is dealing with an adversary of the United States and of the world. Every president that I've served and worked for under, you know, these last 50 years, every president recognized the threat that Russia constitutes to us and to the world. This is the first president who denies that, and I think I'm concerned by that fact.
Wow. All right, Secretary Panetta, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Good to be with you.
We greatly appreciate it, and thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
Lawrence, so the president now goes to meet with Vladimir Putin.
Now you can start to get really worried. If you were worried this morning.
He's going to meet Theresa May first, whose government right now, because of Boris Johnson, whose government right now.
You have to highlight what France, Macron just did. This is a disaster.
Well, really, it's a lot like what Trudeau had to do, which was just go out and make sure everybody had the facts right.
He had the press conference that followed President Trump's. So President Macron went up to the bank of microphones
and just undermined
I
him
listened
with
to
the
what
truth.
the President of the United States just said, and it's just not what we agreed to. The President made that up, says President Macron.
And so now, so let's talk about the Putin meeting. Let's talk about the Theresa May meeting. What concerns you? What should we be looking for?
Well, let's start with we are never going to know what was said in the Putin meeting. We're never going to know. A one-on-one meeting with the two of them plus translators. We can't trust either one of them. The translators are not going to come out and tell us. Maybe they will. Maybe a historian will get one or both of the translators at some point in time. But that's the real the real stress, basically, for the world about that meeting is that we will not know what they have said, what they've talked about. We don't even really know why they're having that meeting. Why is that meeting happening? Why is it just the two of them? Who wanted it to be just the two of them, and why?
Well, I just wonder, do we have David Ignatius? I'm curious about Vladimir Putin watching this unfold, because one thing, we know about him, I've heard stories from my father even, that the man has a massive ego. Watching the president make a mockery of himself in the United States as well, on the world stage, and get undermined by the much younger president of France, and undermined by the much younger leader of Canada, and undermined by even Kim Jong-un. Is he going to want to be seen with him in some ways? Is there possibly a turn? Could the milk curdle a little bit here? Because it's not so exciting to be meeting with the President of the United States at this point, looking at what just unfolded here.
Well, I mean, it is, David, if you own him. But go ahead.
Yeah, but what are you owning exactly?
The milk is curdling. But no, I think for a Russian leader to be meeting with an American president who is, it seems, willing to forgive, understand past transgressions. This is something that President Obama absolutely refused to do unless Russia reversed some of its moves. It's absolutely what Putin would most want. What Putin has dreamed of since he became president was that NATO, which he sees as fundamentally threatening Russia, would go into this kind of disarray. He wants a weakened NATO that's no longer at his doorstep, that's no longer united, that has internal frictions. And, you know, he has had the enormous fortune that a president of the United States has arrived who has, for whatever reasons, brought this state of internal division, bickering within NATO between the U.S. and the EU. In this meeting on Monday in Helsinki, I think Syria is going to be a big topic, and it's important to realize that a lot of the work to prepare for that scenario has been done between Israel and Russia, between Bibi Netanyahu and Putin. They have worked out a kind of set of red lines for Syria that I think are going to be the decisive parameters for what's agreed by President Trump and Putin. So it just shows how complicated the diplomacy has become, how much Putin has surged into the lead as the shaper of these events. And in a sense, I think Trump will be there to ratify the roles that Putin has taken in Syria more than setting a new course. But he couldn't have dreamed of a NATO summit that would set up this, he, meaning Putin, set up his meeting with Trump in a more useful way than this.
Willie? Just some more detail as President Macron of France continues to speak at the NATO summit. He says there is a communique that was published yesterday. It is very detailed. It confirms the goal of 2% by 2024. That is all. Again, saying nothing more, contrary to what the President of the United States claimed.
Wow.
So Doris, there is no need for Vladimir Putin to do anything but warmly embrace Donald Trump, who has undermined everything that the United States put in place following World War II, starting with the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, the creation of NATO, the Berlin airlift. We could go down the line. That was like a knife in the side of the Soviet Empire. They loathed every single thing that every American president, from Harry S. Truman to George H.W. Bush, did from 1947 to 1991. And yet, yesterday on Russian TV, you had commentators saying, we now have an American president who is doing the very thing that we tried to do while the Soviet Union existed, and everything we have tried to do since the breakup of the Soviet Union, and that is break apart the transatlantic alliance. And this isn't the first time that commentators have said such a thing about Donald Trump on Russian TV.
I mean, that disruption is exactly what Mr. Putin wants, obviously, which is being created by the United States in the hands of Mr. Trump right now. You know, what struck me about the press conference, too, is that there was a moment when Mr. Trump said, that's your issue to the press, the meddling issue, you know, your favorite topic. That should be the major topic. Whatever has happened with Russia meddling in our election, in a democracy, there's nothing more important than the validity of that vote. And the intelligence agencies say they meddled, and Trump is still playing with it as if it's the press's little topic. It is the central issue. When I saw him say that, yeah, it's your favorite topic. You don't mind, oh yeah, I'll ask them and maybe they'll say no. He should be representing the United States with fury that something is happening to our election system. And he said, we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, this is central, even more than all this other stuff we're talking about, to undermine our democracy, as it seems that he has done, and to not take it as his responsibility as our president, our spokesman, to be angrier about that than almost anything else, and yet he just treats it as if it's a joke, because the press is making this up and not him.
That moment jumped out to me, too.
Yeah,
it got lost in all the discussion.
Yeah, I know.
NATO, but the question was asked about meddling. He said, I'll ask your favorite questions to the reporter. And he said, what can I do? All I can do is ask. Say, did you? And don't do it again. Kind of shrugging his shoulders like he's reluctant. I think we have the clip. Let's watch.
Maybe we'll get along with the group that we're protecting against. I think that's a real possibility. As you know, I'm meeting with President Putin on Monday. And I think we go into that meeting not looking for so much. We want to find out about Syria. We will, of course, ask your favorite question about meddling. I will be asking that question again. But we'll also be talking about other things. We'll be talking about Ukraine. Ukraine was here today, by the way. And, you know, it's very interesting to hear what they had to say. So, excuse me? What if he denies? Well, he may. I mean, look, he may. You know, what am I going to do? He may deny it. I mean, it's one of those things. So all I can do is say, did you, and don't do it again.
Actually, it shouldn't be the reporter's favorite question, and he shouldn't even ask, did you? He should say, you know, Mr. President, our 4 intel chiefs, 4 men I appointed, all said that you've had a campaign since 2014 to interfere in American democracy. Stop it, or there will be consequences. Stop it, or we will, our countermeasures will be even more extreme. We have a $19 trillion economy. You have a $2 trillion economy. We have Silicon Valley. This is an information war you do not want to take on. Stop it now. I think that would do it. Lawrence O'Donnell.
That, Joe, is exactly what any other president in this situation would be thinking about, is exactly how specific should I as president be in terms of what kind of threat he would issue to Putin in terms of retaliation, and that's a tricky thing. And so it might be as specific as you just got. It might be more specific. It might be less. But it would have to impress. It would have to really land on Putin. These are the consequences if you keep this up. And not only do we know you did it, but when you continue to do this, here's what happens.
You know, Lawrence, let's just talk really quickly. It's remarkable how the last 3 presidents have treated Vladimir Putin, all underestimating what he is capable of. Of course, George W. Bush infamously saying that he looked into his eyes, saw us all. He's an okay guy. Barack Obama whispering to Medvedev, if I could say his name, Medvedev, whispering, hey, let's wait till the election's over. Then I'll have a lot more space to do a lot of things. Then the invasion of Crimea, and Barack Obama frozen. Never occurred to him to say, well, you know what, Mr. Putin? For every troop that goes in to the Ukraine, we're going to send 2 troops into Poland and have military exercises. Do you want to be humiliated? Because we could do that as well. I'm not saying he could have done it, he should have done it, but for some reason, in the 21st century, every American president seems ill-equipped to stand up to the challenge of Vladimir Putin.
I think part of that is the surprise in the Russian turn, a Russian turn backward. It seemed like everything was going forward, and after the Cold War and after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and it seemed like democracy was actually taking hold, and it did feel like there was real progress going on in Russia. And so there is that American inclination in President presidential inclination to encourage that, to speak first in an encouraging way and try to nurture that and try to welcome Russia, as George W. Bush was trying to do.
Right.
He said it in a way that was easily mocked after the fact, but what he was trying to do was welcome Putin into being one of us and give him that feeling. Look at what it feels like to be treated like France.
With respect.
Don't you like this?
Right.
Yes. And so there was this kind of what turns out to be an over-eager hope for Russia. It wasn't, I don't think, personal to Putin. I think it was about Russia, and it was about what they were hoping were the capacities of the Russian government.
One final thing, Lawrence, while we have you here. Willie will tell you.
By the way, the one thing we're sure of that he's going to mention to Putin is how he won Wisconsin.
Yes.
Oh my God. That was incredible.
Like no other person did.
Wisconsin. Putin's going to come out in the briefing after and go, well, Wisconsin. I had no idea.
Republicans, by the way, have won Wisconsin 7 times since Dwight D. Eisenhower.
It was an embarrassing fact-checked.
Yeah,
but he knows because he's been fact-checked 6, 7 times now, so he knows.
Yeah, so what is that part of the brain? Where I mean, you believe that the Wisconsin fact has gotten through, and he still goes out on a world stage this morning
because
no one wants
you
to
believe what you say. Whatever you say is truth at that moment.
And by the way, no one will go up to him and tell him the truth.
Within his inner circle.
You're wrong, within his inner circle. It reminds me, and again, I'm not comparing Donald Trump to Joseph Stalin, but it reminds me of Stalin's advisors. He kept looking at the map and said, okay, why isn't Holland on the map? And of course, it said the Netherlands. And nobody had the courage to tell Stalin throughout World War II that they were the same thing.
You know, I think what Lawrence said is really right, though. There was that moment in time, when I look back on it with the collapse of the Soviet Union, when democracy was spreading all around the world. I remember that exhilarating feeling of something's happening, and that's what's scary right now, even forgetting what's happening with Trump. Democracy is not spreading around the world. The dictatorships are taking hold, and we have to fight that in the people who care about democracy. It's the central challenge of the time.
It's why facts have to be checked.
And Bob, you were talking about how there are a lot of Anglophiles in Congress, a lot of people, obviously, a lot of representatives and senators concerned about NATO's strength. What do you hear about Putin's influence on Eastern and Central Europe? It's sort of the reawakening, at least, of an information Cold War where you have the influence of Vladimir Putin and autocracy being felt in Poland, in Bulgaria, even in Italy, in places in Eastern and Central Europe. Is there a concern, a pronounced concern on the Hill of that trend?
Based on my reporting, Joe, it's important not to overstate the concern among Republicans. If you think about U.S. senators, Republicans going recently to Russia to meet with Russian officials, not really talking too much about the meddling in the 2016 election. You have voices like Senator Corker who are out there, who are vocal, but this is a large body in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Republicans, and they first and foremost are mostly politically with President Trump. And so there are, when you really talk to them outside of the cloakrooms, they're talking about how they hope President Trump is going to help them in the midterm elections. They're not talking about Vladimir Putin, and they're not talking about Helsinki as a worry point. And that's the reality. And the reality is also on the ground. Nobody is even talking about Russia or Mueller in campaigns, and even Democrats who are at the tip of the spear is telling other Democrats, don't talk about Russia at home, talk about jobs, talk about wages. So Lawrence, Willie and other Rolling Stone fans would tell you that for decades, people wanted to get their hands on the tapes of the Rolling Stones rock and roll circus. Mick Jagger didn't like their performance, ended up selling it to The Who. They put some of the performances out there. And when it came out, there was just this tremendous buzz, but it's nothing like the buzz that I had felt around your paperback, the release paperback, Deadly Force. This book was written in 1983. I remember studying for the bar.
I need to do a fact check.
And people being interrupted, like, as I'm studying for the board, they're like, when do you think Joe Deadly Force will come out in paperback, right?
Yeah.
I remember
the birth
of my first son. I'm sitting there, the doctor saying, hey, I know you know some people. When do you think Deadly Force will be out in paperback? I'm so tired. I've spent 35 years
waiting.
Like having to try to answer a question that there was no answer to until now, Willie.
Today is your day, Joe.
All right, the 30 seconds. The reason we're bringing the book back right now.
The setup, 4 minutes. The answer, 30 seconds.
Welcome to Morning Show.
This is a
You're playing hardball.
It's a story about a civil rights case that my father brought against the Boston police. He was a former Boston cop himself who went to law school and college nights when he was working full-time as a cop. And a black woman in Roxbury came to him and told him the story of her husband being killed by police. He knew right away it was a bad shooting, and he took on this story. And this is 40 years ago when this happened. Wow. And no one was paying attention to the problems of police use of deadly force anywhere in America at the time. And he took on this lonely battle, and he won, and he set all sorts of precedent by taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And I wanted to bring the book out again now now that we're in an era where people are finally paying attention, started paying attention 4 years ago, first with the killing of Michael Brown and then Eric Garner here in New York City, and show them where we've been on this subject historically, show them how much has changed. There are some good things that have changed, but the real story is how much has not changed and how much of the problem feels almost intractable. If I can leave one good positive note about this, the one thing I'm really glad to report is that I don't believe that this story of basically